testify under oath voluntarily?
Yes, I am.
Have you been paid by anyone except expenses to come to Clearwater?
No.
Do you have a lawsuit against the Church of Scientology?
No.
Does the Church of Scientology have a lawsuit against you?
No.
Has anyone suggested to you that you should state anything but the truth, or has anyone suggested that you change your testimony for any reason?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn, you want to present your witness?
I've been a Scientologist for 24 years. I'm what's called a field Scientologist. I'm not a member of the Sea Org, never have been. I operate, or did operate, groups in Connecticut called missions, which are autonomous Scientology groups. I left the church in January this year. This is the second forum that I've been to in Clearwater recently, the first one being in December last year, where a group of field persons such as myself, approximately 50, what are called mission holders, where the executives of the field groups got together and demanded that officials of the church and the Sea Org be present to hear our protests and our demands for reform within the church. This hearing went on for 5 days, and during this time, it was probably one of the most emotionally moving experiences I've ever had. I heard people give first-hand accounts of what they had experienced in Scientology. These are people still in Scientology, by the way. And I thought that some of my hardships were terrible, but after hearing those, I found I really got off quite easy. I heard a woman describe how her husband went to flag when it was on the ship because he had a heart condition, and one of Hubbard's prescriptions for that is vitamin E. And he came back, and according to her description, I knew the man, by the way, he came back a broken man and died 2 or 3 months later, and a little gory, but the autopsy showed his stomach to be filled with undissolved vitamin E capsule. Another mother spoke at this, and it was almost like listening to a woman crazed with grief. Her daughter, who was a young mother, was also a field Scientologist running a group in Sacramento, California, and had come to the flag base for the high-level auditing, what they call Med for OT, and had become so distressed and so upset that she kept calling for come do something to help me. She couldn't travel from California to Clearwater because she was simply too ill, and so couldn't they do something? Couldn't she transfer her money to Los Angeles and get the auditing to help her? And they said, no, we can't transfer the money. Shortly after that, the young woman died. The autopsy disclosed it was from a ruptured pancreas, which I'm told is a stress-induced condition. Hearing her mother, who's an old friend of mine, and as was the young woman, and her husband, tell these things to the church officials as examples of the inhumanity and complete lack of regard for the humanity of people of this so-called church. It was one of the most difficult paths that I had to ever sit through. I probably have a reputation in Scientology as one of the more vocal malcontents. I've been pressing for some form of reform for many, many years. After this meeting in December, we went back to Connecticut with a firm conviction that there was no interest within this church for reform. The dirty tricks, the guardians' operations, and that type of thing, which they told us were all a matter of the past, we found out were not a matter of the past. They tried to break up the meeting that we field people had called. They didn't call it. That we had called out here to try to get some of these things corrected. I've been a minister of this church for some 16 years, and I really took it seriously. I've married people, I've buried them, and to me it was a duty and it was an honor, and to find out what my church had been doing, it's a little hard on me. Now, there's one other point, and one of the main reasons why I wanted to be here is that I see I'm a professional auditor and a case supervisor, and I've been doing it for many years. I know what is taught in the technology of Ron Hubbard. I've heard his tapes by the hundreds and read his bulletins by the thousands, and I can quote almost anything you would like quoted right now. I know what this man says about illness, and illness is cured only by auditing. That is not what is told the public, but that is told what is taught us, we who are the practitioners and the ministers of the church. The reason why I say this is because I believe it's dangerous. My late wife, Julie, and I were in Washington in 1977 taking training. And I had recently had at that time, had another one of my run-ins with a guardian. They don't like people to be vocal. And so I was ordered to sec checks, security checking, and had a guard posted on me and my wife, who was guilty because she was my wife. I managed to get through the security check because I'm an expert security checker and I know how to get through them. You learn these things. You know how to we people in the field learn how to survive at the Flag Land Base and at the Org. We learn the rules of the game. You understand my point? We don't walk in with like a wide-eyed virgin walking into a military brothel. We learn how to survive. At any rate, this was a very, very hard thing on us because there was a degree of duress. And we went home kind of beaten. We didn't really even want to do any more Scientology studying. And Julie had complained of tiredness and this and that. Julie rarely ever complained of anything. But anyway, I saw her beginning to slow down. And by the summer of 1978, she, who was also a very highly trained auditor, and also, you must realize, both of us were totally persuaded that the source of all illness is mental, except for, say, a broken leg. And the way of curing it is with auditing. This is our business. So during the summer, Julie lost more and more of her energy and had some swelling and some small chest pains and this and that, and began to lose her voice. So I thought, well, Flag has the best auditors in the world and should be able to help her out. So I sent her down here to Clearwater in, I guess it was October of 1978. We never even really thought about going to see a doctor. I just thought the Scientologist doesn't think about that. Well, they sent her back a week later, sicker, and she couldn't speak really. She couldn't even whisper anymore. She'd write notes. So I tapped on her back because she was complaining about her chest, and on one side I could hear the sound of it, the hollow sound that you hear when you tap, and the other side it wasn't hollow. And so I knew that there wasn't any air on that side. So we went to see a doctor, and he had her in the hospital very quickly. She was there 2 days when we were given the report, and what it was adenocarcinoma, which is cancer of the lymph glands of the lungs, and her right lung had totally collapsed. And which this cancer had also infiltrated her throat and paralyzed her vocal cords. And it progressed to the point where it was totally hopeless. I mean, they didn't even suggest chemotherapy. And sent her home, and I cared for her for 10 days, and she died in my arms. And I began to think a little bit about this type of thing at that point. This type of thing isn't too easy to say. But I think that it's important that somebody say it, that this is what is taught the professional Scientologists. And by following the instructions and following what we work very hard to learn, it cost my wife her life. She may have died anyway, we don't know. If we'd taken her to a doctor early, perhaps not. You can only speculate on that, but what I do know is that because of my faith in this man, Ron Hubbard, she didn't have a chance. And
here's a few questions from me. Do you think the organization can survive a reform movement such as you would like to initiate?
The organization that you have heard about could not possibly survive a reform movement.
What percentage of the field people feel like you do?
I would say 95%.
How would you describe the people that are left at Flag now, which is Clearwater, left running the organization, the church? Are they the old-timers like you?
I can describe them all right. I don't want to get sued.
Are they the old-timers like you that have
No.
spent half their life or virtually their entire life in there, or are they the younger people that are?
They're immature, ignorant, brainwashed, religious zealots. That's my personal opinion.
What did he call it?
Mistress?
Just quickly.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there anything, you've been hearing the testimony for today, yesterday?
Yes?
Is there any single piece of information that we need to have yet? Or have we asked all the right questions? Is everything clearly out in the open now?
I think you've done a remarkable job of asking proper questions and gaining specific information. The only protest that I personally have, and I'll say this before somebody says I can't, real fast, is that you have been operating, limiting or restricting the hearing somewhat because you're discussing a church and a religion. And you see, I'm a minister of this, and I'm trained in it, and it didn't become religious or spiritual until it was necessary organizationally to gain First Amendment protection in the 1960s. Religion had nothing to do with it, and still has nothing to do with it, in fact.
Even though you consider yourself a minister of this?
Yes, I'm a minister of the church. In order to do that, I had to very, very carefully sort out what is a minister. It is one who cares, and I care for people, and so I think I could qualify.
That's it.
No.
Mr. Shoemaker?
Mr. McKee, the incident you described last December, you say that was prompted by individuals such as yourself demanding that meeting be held?
That's correct. It was called by two individuals who are field Scientologists, not church members.
Approximately how many of the field members attended that meeting?
Well, we started out with about 50 on the first day, which is supposed to be a two-day meeting, and by the fifth day, there were about 200 there.
These were all from all over the entire country that were expressing their concerns about the way that the operation at the Flag was being carried out.
All over the United States, Canada, Mexico, Great Britain, South Africa, yes. It was videotaped by the Guardian's Office complete, or by the EC organization complete.
Oh, it was videotaped.
And those tapes do exist somewhere.
Was there any type of change that occurred from that meeting?
Well, the highest officials showed up on the sixth day, and they didn't want any further comment. They essentially told us what we were going to be doing. I made the mistake, from their viewpoint, organizational mistake of standing up and speaking anyway, and so I was very quickly after that declared to be a suppressive person. They implied some promises that there might be some changes, but and made one specific promise, which was broken 2 weeks later.
Oh, you were declared a public person, a suppressive person after standing up and making your feelings known.
That's correct. I was declared. The date of the meeting was first week of December last year, and I was declared, I think, the second week of January.
did they notify you of this, or how did you find out that you were been declared a suppressive person?
Oh, one of the U.S. Guardian people came and gave me the piece of paper, laid the piece of paper on a table, and said he'd like to handle me.
Oh, yeah.
And from that point, what was your response?
Well, handle meant that I had to recant and apologize for everything I did, and I didn't have anything to apologize for, so I said, well, you're going to have to take your best shot, because not only am I out, but so are my groups.
So, with your leaving, were there a number of others such as yourself that have also left the church based upon that?
I ran 2 missions. I was the director for 2 missions in Connecticut. A total of about 50 active people who would come 2 or 3 times a week. Every single individual and every staff member left with me.
In your 2 missions?
Yes. And my friends in Rochester also left.
Mr. McKee, I'm sure you've heard described over the last few days some terrible situations relating to health conditions.
Yes.
Do you have any first-hand knowledge relating to?
Not first-hand knowledge. I've heard the stories, but I haven't seen it. I saw it on the Apollo. I was on the ship, and I saw the conditions on the ship, and it was inhuman.
Am I to assume those types of conditions did not exist where you were up in Connecticut, or?
Oh no. We.
It's a field mission.
No. See, a church of Scientology, like Boston, New York, or the Flag Land Base, are churches of Scientology. We are Church of Scientology Mission of New London, Connecticut. Church of Scientology Mission of. I'm the president of the corporation, and there are no members of the corporation that are not members of Connecticut group. It's a franchise group. It's like Connecticut's McDonald's. Franchise.
You had indicated that you had problems off and on by the Guardian's office. Are you familiar or aware of any with first-hand knowledge in which they've attempted to obtain auditing files from you for use?
Well, yes, in relation to the extraction of information for nefarious purposes, I do not have any first-hand information. I always assumed that no one would ever dare touch a confessional folder. Since I heard that, which was not too long ago, I've refused to send any folders.
I mean, you did previously.
You were before then.
Oh, yes. I worked with...
And
I didn't know.
And you sent those to Clearwater?
Oh, yes. Many. I really had a very hard time believing anybody would do that.
Do the field people, are they aware of the
I'll
dirty
burn
tricks?
them first, I guarantee you.
Are the field people aware of all the dirty tricks?
No. There is a gradual awareness creeping in. You have to realize that the information within the Scientology network is very restricted. Not many people even read newspapers, and if they do, we're taught that this is only enemy attack. And it's really marvelous.
You were rather isolated then in New London, is it?
New London and Waterbury, Connecticut, yes.
Okay.
We're not that isolated. We're just not quite that naive, maybe.
Do you have a copy of the paper declaring you a suppressive person?
I don't think I have it with me.
But could we, if we asked for it, could we get a copy of it?
Absolutely, yes.
Gentleman on my left.
Where was the meeting held?
Where?
Yes.
At the Sandcastle, which one of the hotels owned by the Sea Org.
What made you believe in the LRH technology? You were a good minister and a upstanding minister in the church all the way up until a few months ago for over, I guess, 20 years.
24 years.
24 years. What made you believe in it?
Well, I could pass it off as stupidity, but the fact of the matter was that I'm a training an engineer, and the book Dianetics has a very logical development of the subject, and that appealed to my thought process very much. And the thing it promised, which is what I wanted, being only a so-so student, was a higher IQ.
They guaranteed you that?
Yes.
Did you ever consider L. Ron Hubbard's background, the promises held out? You were an engineer. Did you believe it more because he was a nuclear physicist?
Well, I never quite bid on that one because I do know a little bit about nuclear physics and mathematics, but I granted the man some poetic license.
Okay. My last question is, do you think the belief in the technology would be hindered if this flag base was put under any type of financial scrutiny?
That the technology would be hindered?
Yes.
Absolutely not. What little there is workable to it, which really isn't very much, would be all they would have left, and it would be a tremendous favor if that's all they could do.
You mean that instead, well, in fact, it might help the spread or belief of this technology if there was some kind of financial controls? Or scrutiny?
No, I
strike that, financial scrutiny.
Okay. In my opinion, at this point in time, not only will Scientology no longer spread, it had stopped spreading about 4 years ago. By my observation, and I've observed quite a number of other missions, my own and orgs, it's been shrinking rapidly. And I think that the idea of financial scrutiny is vital, and I think it would also be allowed by law, corporate law, that the funds are handled as prescribed by law for not-for-profit corporations. Were that done, all they could do over there is service people. And
that would actually help?
It would help the people. It would help the people, but the little neo-Nazi types wouldn't have anything to do.
Okay, Mr. Burfield.
No,
Do you have any other witnesses?
No, what I'd like to do at this point, quickly, this is very vital to Mr. McKee's testimony and to everything else in this case. If we could put on I mentioned at the outset in my opening, the decree in the case of the United States v. Article or Device. The case came down in 1971. The judgment was entered in 1972. At that time, after the Scientologists had lost 2 jury trials, with regard to basically all the issues we've talked about here, the medical issues, the court required, we could go down to the number 3. The court issued the following order, which is still in effect and has always been in effect since 1972. And it says, any and all items of written, printed, or graphic matter which directly or indirectly refers to the e-meter or to Dianetics and or Scientology and or auditing or processing shall not be further used or distributed unless and until the item shall bear the following prominent printed warning permanently affixed to said item on the outside front cover or on the title page in letters no smaller than 11-point type, than 11-point leaded type. Bring it down. The other way. I've just read from number 3. Any and all items are written. And then there's the warning, which is supposed to be an 11-point leaded type on the cover page or on the title page. The device known as a Hubbard electrometer or e-meter used in auditing a process of Scientology and Dianetics is not medically or scientifically useful for the diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of any disease. It is not medically or scientifically capable of improving the health or bodily functions of anyone. That's what the court ordered in 1972, and within the last 48 hours we have purchased a couple of publications from the Fort Harrison Hotel which have already been introduced in evidence, and one of them is the book Dianetics, and nowhere in that book does that warning appear. There is a little to the reader, which you can barely read, which discusses Dianetics as some type of a religious philosophy. And also a book all about radiation by a nuclear physicist and a medical doctor. Also, the warning is not affixed in that publication. So I'll put the judgment into evidence.
Would you say they're in violation of the court order?
That's correct.
That 72 court order?
That's correct.
Within the state of Florida, the city or the county Who should be made aware of that information? What agency?
There, it could range from the Secretary of State dealing with the Charitable Corporations Division, the State's Attorney General, the Pinellas County State's Attorney General, the Pinellas County Consumer Protection Department, and if there was a Consumer Protection Department in the city of Clearwater, they could enforce it also. And the next exhibit is an exhibit entitled Scientology Operations in Clearwater, which is several hundred pages of Guardian's Office activities against your former mayor, Mayor Cazares, including Operation Taco Left, Operation Speedy Gonzales, Operation Keeler 1, Operation Keeler 2. Some of these things you've probably read about in the newspaper, as well as Project Normandy, the first page of which states project information. The major purpose of this project is to obtain enough data on the Clearwater area to be able to determine what groups and individuals B1 will need to penetrate and handle in order to establish area control. And then operating targets are just about every major organization in the city of Clearwater. And the last exhibit is simply, or the next to last exhibit, is a collection of documents involving basically how to commit criminal operations. And then we will be entering into evidence approximately 10 to 12 affidavits of various individuals that corroborate the testimony and some degree add to in some degree of some of what you've heard, including the affidavit of Tanya Burden, who was a Sea Org member at the age of 13 to the age of 17. She spent 2.5 years in Clearwater, during which time she received no education, as the affidavit states. She worked 16 to 18 hours a day between the ages of 15 and 17, coding and decoding telexes for some of those operations and other criminal operations beyond the United States. Those codes were double and triple coded in the OWL code, the EAGLE code, and codes of similar type. So she was coding and decoding, and she didn't even know what she was coding. And she ended up in the RPF. She describes conditions in the RPF, some of which you've heard here today. She describes an individual chained to the boiler in the Fort Harrison Hotel. She describes conditions on the ship, and she generally describes what the Guardian's Office did to her when she escaped from the Fort Harrison, went back to Las Vegas, was kidnapped, taken to California, told to pick up the cans, the e-meter, and subjected to an intensive security check, during which period of time she signed legal releases to L. Ron Hubbard, Mary Sue Hubbard, Church of Scientology, waivers, admitted that it was all her misconduct, and that she owed the Church of Scientology $63,000.
And she's still a minor?
No, she's now about 22 years old.
At that point, though, was she still a minor?
Correct. And the individuals that are now running the Church of Scientology were Sea Org members of her age that grew up with her, with L. Ron Hubbard, in the age of 21, 22 years of age. And there's many other affidavits here that pertain to various subjects, including a widow, Peggy Bear, from whom in 2 weeks they got $33,000. Shortly after her husband died, she was targeted, and similar types of items. We'll mark all of those affidavits. Yeah. At this point in time, we'll wait to hear from Scientologists.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for being with us for 4 days. We will be waiting for the Scientologists, as you will be Monday. I wonder, as I said earlier, before these hearings start even, that it's not the big city fighting this one organization. It's little old Clearwater. It's trying to defend itself against a worldwide organization that's taking in over $1 million a day in Clearwater. Thank you for being with us. This meeting is adjourned.